Well, hi, friends. This is for those of you who are looking to get Safe Kids trained as a part of being on the church board, but you are not necessarily needing the full kids ministry training because you're not in a season of life where working with kids is the place where you're wanting to serve right now. So this is going to be pretty abbreviated. I'll just go through a few highlights and then do a lot of our abuse awareness training. We'll focus most of our time on that. Once you have finished this video, there is a quiz kind of thing that you can fill out that just lets me know that you've watched the video, you got the kind of most important parts, and we can have a record that you have completed the training as a part of being on the church board and being our safety committee. So thanks so much for doing this. I will try to make this as brief as I can. Well, I'll quickly tell you about our vision for our kids ministry, and it is the same as our vision for the entire church. It's that Jesus has been the very best neighbor to us, and so we want to be good neighbors to one another. And we want to be a spiritual community of hope and transformation that lives the way of Jesus. These two things are true for the entire church community, and they're true for our kids as well. But the way in which they get worked out is different. But I always like to remind people that what we are doing downstairs is not childcare. It is not babysitting. It is not keeping the kids busy so that the important work of worship can happen upstairs. What we are doing downstairs in the elementary, the early childhood, and even the nursery is practicing being really good neighbors, remembering the story of God, and being a spiritual community of hope and transformation. So that is going on in each of these rooms, even though it looks different than our worship upstairs. So you have heard me say this a million times, but we want our kids to be known, valued, informed here at 8th Street Church. So we want our kids to be known by name. We want to not only know their name, but their stories, their interests, who their family is. They're welcomed here, not just so that their parents can learn about Jesus, but they're welcomed because they are an integral part of the family of God. So we have a rule, typically a Safe Kids rule is that for every 5 kids, you want 1 adult to be watching them. That's a pretty good safety ratio. But as far as our kids being known, we kind of flip that rule on its head. And we say for every 1 kid, we want there to be 5 adults who are deeply involved in their lives, who know them, know their stories, seek them out on a Sunday morning, care about them, and that they can rely on. So that's what known is. Valued. We want to value our kids for what they offer to us as the community of faith. We do not invite them into worship and expect them to act as adults. They are not little adults, and they have particular needs and gifts that they can offer to us. And so we want to value those rather than dismissing them. And then the last thing is formed. We want to walk the way of Jesus alongside our kids. Our deepest hope that is that our kids would live the way of Jesus, the way of love and kindness, nonviolence, and inclusion of the marginalized. We want our kids to live lives that are full of the fruit of the Spirit and living into this kingdom that we proclaim as reality. And so we do that through a variety of means, just like we do upstairs, through different spiritual practices, through remembering the sacred scriptures, and through being together in community. Mr. Rogers is kind of our vision for how we want to do kids ministry. We hope to tell stories in the same kind of compelling way, to build a community in the same kind of compelling way, and allow kids to just kind of come as they are and listen well to them and respect them. So this is sort of what our different rooms do. I'll just give you a pretty quick overview. So our nursery serves our kids from 6 weeks old to 2 to 3 years. Now this is a little bit in flux because some of our volunteers had said that they were hoping to broaden the age of our nursery so that it can, so that our toddler room can best serve our toddlers. But I will be honest with you and tell you that our nursery is quite full right now. It's very, very full. And so this is a little bit in flux, and some of the ages will depend based on the families. Sometimes babies move up earlier to be with younger sibling or older siblings, and sometimes they stay a little bit longer due to developmental needs. So just a basic thing, we play with the kids, we sing with them, we offer comfort and care, and help them develop a secure attachment to church and to the people at church. Our early childhood room is next to that, and it has ages, like I said, 3 to 4 through pre-K. They learn through story and play. So when we begin introducing the biblical story, and we create a safe attachment to the church here as well. And then elementary serves our kids kindergarten through 5th grade, and we learn through story and wondering together. We ask a lot of questions together. The kids ask a lot of fantastic questions. Sometimes we do crafts, sometimes we do games. And currently the way that this works is that our kids stay upstairs with us through part of the service and then head downstairs for part of it. As our elementary numbers grow, we will be adjusting that as well, most likely, to offer more time for our elementary kids and also offer more space for our kinder through 2 kids to get some separate space from our 3rd through 5th graders. So these are just kind of basic. In case you don't know, the nursery is directly across from Pastor Banning's office. The early childhood room is right next to that, the one that's closer to the outside of the church. And then our elementary kids meet in the community room directly down the stairs from the sanctuary. These are just the steps to volunteering in the neighborhood. I know you all are not planning to volunteer currently, but this is important for you to know as a safety committee, and we need you to fill out all these steps as well. I believe most of you have done this, but if not, you can go ahead and do that. We ask that you will attend 8th Street Church for at least 6 months. You all can check that off. Submit a volunteer application with 3 personal references. So you can I have sent this to all of you, but if you need me to resend it, I can. I think most of you have filled it out, but I can't state that for certain. So if you don't have the link to that, just let me know and I'm happy to send that your way. Pass a background check, interview with me, which is basically just I ask a handful of questions and we just have that for our record. And then the Safe Kids training that you are doing right now. So this is our abuse awareness portion of the training. So I just want to warn you before we go in that there are some heavy topics discussed. We're going to talk about creating a safe ministry space. We want it to be spiritually safe, emotionally safe. Also physically safe is really, really important. It's probably one of our highest priorities. So we're going to talk about how to keep things safe from physical abuse and sexual abuse as well in this portion. So, like I said, this is our first priority. If we are not creating a place where our kids feel physically safe, then none of the rest of what we do matters. So we are going to run background checks for you all, but we also want to lead you through this training because this helps you be educated on abuse. It helps you be educated on what to look for, what it looks like, the patterns that are involved. And we want to equip you with some education and resources that you need so that you can spot abuse appropriately respond as needed. And so as the church board, you act as the safety committee, which means that whenever there are any kinds of allegations, any kind of problems, anyone reports on abuse, something like that, I'm going to be bringing it straight to Pastor Chris and to you. And so I want you to also be aware of this so that you can be looking out for our kids and creating this kind of safe environment. So when we talk about sexual abuse, there are just some important things to know about those who are looking to abuse kids. They are going to gravitate towards activities and programs where the barrier to entry is low. The barriers to entry are low when there's not a lot of education. So a background check is great, and we are always going to do that, but we are not going to rely on a background check to be the only method of keeping our kids safe. We know that you'll see in a little bit that background checks can miss a lot of people. And so we want to have actually a high barrier. So all of those things that I showed you a minute ago, those steps to volunteering with kids ministry, it does make it really hard to volunteer with kids. It does. And that definitely inhibits our volunteer numbers. But we are never going to lower the barrier to entry because we want to make sure that we have safe people who are volunteering with our kids. That is the most important thing to us. So we're going to put a lot of steps in between coming to church and getting the responsibility to care for and volunteer with our kids. So these are just some misconceptions about safety and about abuse, particularly sexual abuse. So background checks are a standalone safety system. They are important. And like I said, we're always going to use it, but less than 10% of sexual abusers will encounter the criminal justice system at all. So we are not going to rely on that completely. Let's see. Abusers are characterized by a creepy stranger. This is not true. 90% of children who are sexually abused are abused by someone that the child knows and trusts. It is easy to spot an abuser. There's no visual profile for an abuser. It's kind of similar by the creepy stranger. I can't tell you what to visually look for in a person. And that is what makes it so insidious and so dangerous sometimes, is because we have a visual profile in our head, and that is just not the case. All abusers are men. We know that 90% of convicted sexual abusers are men, and 10% are women. But again, we're not there yet, but it's a small portion of those who actually get convicted. So yes, the numbers are proportionately mostly men, but we know that there are women who are involved with that as well. All abusers are adults. Actually, 1 out of every 3 reported cases of sexual abuse is peer-to-peer abuse. So while we want to look out for the adults who are volunteering and working with our kids, we also want to look out for abuse that might be occurring in a peer-to-peer relationship. And we will talk about that a little bit more in detail in a minute. So there are 2 main types of an abuser. There is a preferential offender and an abduction offender. So I'm going to tell you about the abduction offender first. This is less than 10%. This is the person that you would think of who is going to drive by and grab a kid off the street and take them physically away from you. It's not that it doesn't happen, but it is much more rare. It's less than 10%. And so our basic safety measures are going to be in place to help keep kids safe from that kind of an offender. So basic safety measures would be like, we don't take kids outside unless we have adequate adult supervision. And by that, I mean, on a Sunday to Sunday basis, we do not take kids outside. We don't have a fenced in area that would be safe to do that. The times when we take kids outside would be times like Camp 8th Street in the summer. And when we do that, we have a high amount of volunteers who are there, and we have older kids, and we would keep them away from the street, those types of things. And so just basic safety measures. One thing that we can think about, while this is very rare, after Sunday services, kids are given back to their parents, and a lot of times they will just be let free to kind of roam the church or roam the outside grounds of the church. And so I would invite you as people in leadership to watch out for those kids. They are all of our kids, right? I'm not telling you to tell them what to do unless they're in the street or something, but just keep an eye on them. Watch out for them as a way to care for them and their parents. And if you see something suspicious, you can go stand by them or what have you. So that's the basics of the abduction offender. Now, the preferential offender is more in line of what we especially need to be aware of and be looking out for in terms of our context at 8th Street Church. So the definition is someone who prefers to have sexual relationships with a child. They almost always have a preference for a specific age range and gender. These are the characteristics of an abuser. Abusers groom children for sexual interaction. So the grooming process typically looks pretty similar. It can change depending on the age, type of program, et cetera, but it follows a very similar pattern. So we will talk about that. So yes, we're going to talk about that. So abusers do groom children for sexual interaction, and we're going to look at that process, but they also groom the gatekeepers. A gatekeeper is you, it's me, it's anyone in leadership, anyone who is in that barrier from coming to church versus working with kids. Anyone who kind of serves as a protection for kids, you would be considered a gatekeeper. So yeah, it's parents, grandparents, teachers, babysitters, older siblings, church volunteers, church leaders. Grooming of the gatekeepers typically looks the same. And so they are going to attempt to gain your trust so that you will allow them to have alone time with a child. So they will be overly helpful, overly kind, just trying to get this time away with a specific child. Okay, so this is the pattern for grooming children for sexual interaction. So the first thing they're going to do is to gain access, to work to gain access. They're going to seek an opportunity to work with children. They're going to need a name tag. They're going to need to be official, and they're going to need to gain the trust of adults. So that's what we talked about with grooming the gatekeepers. That is one of the very first things that they're going to need to do in order to follow out this pattern. Now, I will say that through all of my training and my research and things that I've learned, that because we have so many barriers, because we have so many steps in order to get involved with kids ministry, it is really hard to gain access. And for a lot of abusers, that is just enough of a barrier that they're going to find a different church that does not have these same barriers. That is not 100% the case. This is why we do this training. This is why we have policies in place. But it is very hard for you to gain access to our kids at 8th Street. And so that is partially why we do that, is because we want to make every step, almost as impossible as we can. We can't prevent risk 100% of the time, but we can certainly put in a multi-layered, multifaceted approach that helps to make this really, really difficult or less likely to happen in our context. So that is the first thing that they're going to do, is to gain access. The second thing that they will do is to select a child. And so people who are looking to abuse children are typically going to look for kids who are on the fringes, have unmet needs, kids who are longing for attention or affection. Those kids are the ones who are at a higher risk. And then the person who's looking to abuse kids, they would need alone time with a child in order to introduce sexual behavior. The third step is introduction of nudity and sexual touch. So there's something called the barrier testing and erosion. Now, we all have kind of an innate sense of what is appropriate, what feels, like it's okay, or like, oh, they gave me a hug. Well, that felt okay. But this made me uncomfortable. We all kind of have this innate sense of what is appropriate. And a person who's looking to abuse kids is not going to go from barely knowing them all the way to sexually touching them. They are going to, over time, start to erode those innate barriers. And so they will consistently kind of test and push this barrier. And then over time, they start to be eroded. So they will learn where the barriers are and kind of see if they're negotiable. So this is going to look different depending on the age of the child, but the goal is always going to be the same. And so things that they might do, it might include sexual jokes, sexual language, might include sending images that are increasingly graphic, or those types of things touch that becomes increasingly more inappropriate. Sexuality and sexual things, it's a natural curiosity for kids. They are naturally curious and they want to know more about it. And so a person who's looking to abuse kids is going to take advantage of that natural curiosity. And they are they're going to take advantage of that. And so things that this might look like is playful or accidental nudity. This could include tickling, roughhousing, pantsing, things that are that maybe on the surface might look accidental or fine, are not, right? Like so it's whenever it continues to get more and more and more inappropriate, it can be a part of this process. And then the fourth part of the pattern, this is the only part of the pattern that is not, what's the word I'm looking for? It's the only part of the pattern that is not linear. And so you have to gain access before you select a child right? That's sort of the pattern. But this part of keeping the victim silent, that happens all throughout this. It happens the entire time. It's the only part of the process that's not sequential. It's kind of built into their process. And so it includes threats, guilt, shame. The child will often say, "No one will believe me." That's kind of the message that they are telling themselves. And so the CDC says that 98% of outcries by children are factual and accurate, even if they recant. So I tell you that to tell you that their biggest fear, a kid's biggest fear in reporting, is typically that no one will believe them, or they've been threatened with embarrassment or threatened with family. But this thing about no one believing them is one of the biggest threats that carries the most weight. And so we're going to talk about what to do if a child reports to you, and believe them is one of the biggest things that I can tell you. But it's important that you know, in Oklahoma, every adult is a mandatory reporter. So that means that if a child reports something to you that seems to be abuse, whether it is sexual or not, you are mandated to report to DHS. Sometimes you don't know. The line is often a little bit gray. Is this abuse or is it not? Is this something that is reportable or not? We are happy to talk through that with you. The pastors are. We also have quite a few therapists and people who work in foster care and things like that, who are very, very used to this process. They are familiar with what is reportable to DHS and what is not, and how to go about that process. So I tell you that, yes, you are a mandated reporter. It's very important that if a child reports something to you, that you would report it to DHS, but we will help you with that process if that ever happens. We've got a lot of resources to help with that. So here's some basic guidelines in the moment if a kid is reporting to you. You're going to listen and respond calmly. You're going to have some feelings obviously rise up in you, but you're going to need to put those aside to deal with at a later moment, because in that moment you need to be focused on the child and their emotional experience rather than responding with your emotional experience. You're going to want to be sensitive to vague or partial disclosures. It's common to offer a piece of the narrative before offering a full confession. So ask these kinds of open-ended questions. Do you want to tell me more? What happened next? And do not ask shaming questions. What were you wearing? How long has this been happening? Why didn't you tell us sooner? Those kinds of things are going to shut a kid down and make them feel responsibility and blame for things that are not their fault. So always report to me, even if you're not sure if it rises to a level of illegality. Have that on here for our volunteers, those who are working in our rooms from day to day or from week to week. You can feel free to report to any of the pastors. If you see something that just makes you feel a little weird, a little strange, just tell one of us. And we are going to we keep track of that. We make a note of it. and you don't know if your weird feeling combines with 5 other people's weird things that they have seen. And we can begin to see a pattern of something that's happening. So if you see something that makes you feel uncomfortable, that raises a red flag in you, just trust it and let us know. It's not gossiping. We are not going to go tell anybody. We just keep track of it internally for our records so that if there is some kind of pattern, that we can spot it and keep kids safe. And then, of course, report to the authorities if it is a reportable offense. And then don't promise that you can keep secrets. So sometimes a kid will say, I have something that I need to tell you, or something's been happening, but I need you to keep it a secret. I need you to not tell my parents. I need you to not tell anyone that I said this. And you might be tempted to promise that so that they'll tell you, but that actually will just begin another process of breaking their trust. And so this is a little script that we have developed if you're not sure how to say it, but you can just say there are some things that I cannot keep secret. If you or another child is being hurt, I cannot keep that a secret. I hope you will talk to me and I will believe you, but some things I cannot keep secret. This is a quick thing about peer-to-peer abuse. So we've talked a lot about adult to child abuse, and now we're going to talk quickly about peer-to-peer abuse and how we can be aware of that. So there is a differentiation between natural sexual curiosity and abuse. So if it is just a natural curiosity, we for sure need to redirect that, especially at church. Like that's not something that needs to be happening at church, and we'll need to talk to parents about that and all sorts of things. But abuse is a little bit different, and they do need to be treated differently. Abuse includes forcing one party to engage in sexual activity, and that's going to happen when there's a power dynamic. And so often it could be age. An older child might abuse a younger child, or it could be size difference, something like that, taller kid. So there's going to be some kind of power differential in a peer-to-peer abuse situation. The top place is in the bathroom, but really any unseen place or lower supervision is a high-risk place. Things to look for: a kiddo who struggles to accept boundaries, doesn't respond to social cues, and doesn't seem to be able to stop sexual behavior. Redirection is not working. So we're going to need to have something else happen after. If redirection is not working, we're going to have further conversations about how to keep everybody safe. And one of the highest risks is overnight trips. So for our context, I'll tell you quickly that the top place we know is in the bathroom. And so the ways in which we help keep that, we try to deal with that in our context, is that in our early childhood room, we have one bathroom. It is one kid in, one kid out. That is it. There's no, they don't go in together. And then in our elementary room, you'll notice we have the women's bathroom, the men's bathroom, and then the middle family bathroom. Our kids during elementary worship are only allowed to go in the family bathroom one at a time. That just helps keep supervision simple. There's just one kid in, and then they come out and another can come in. So that's one way that we have thought through that. And then overnight trips, we have sent kids in the past to summer camps, and that is a place when we would need to be extra vigilant about this, is when we are going to summer camps. Other than that, we don't have any regular overnight experiences that are in our context. So what do? We're going to look for warning signs, ramp up supervision in places of higher risk, which we have done, and will continue to do as our contexts and our rooms change and things like that, and communicate. I've said it all throughout, but again, if you see something that feels strange, that kind of raises a flag for you, just tell someone in charge, tell one of the pastors, and we will just make note of it. So communication is one of the biggest ways that we can keep kids safe. Secrecy and holding things back, that's one of the dangers. That's one of the most dangerous things for our kiddos. So communication is a big deal. These are just some short-term impacts of sexual abuse to watch for. So if you see a kid exhibiting many of these things, then you're maybe going to want to dig a little deeper, reach out, try to find out what's going on. So you can read through this list. It's lack of hygiene, bedwetting, if it's a new behavior, sudden weight change, fear or phobia of the dark, self-mutilation or cutting, disinterested in activities that they once enjoyed, startled to respond or touch, sexual play with toys, himself or others, and explicit drawings that a child would not be familiar with at that age. So again, it is not just one of these things. If a kid, is really into gymnastics and all of a sudden they like basketball, that's not necessarily cause for concern. It's when you have kind of all of this together that some flags would be raised in you, some things that you might start thinking through and digging a little deeper. So what do we do in our age 3 context? We're going to watch for grooming behaviors. This list that I have here is similar to the one before. One or two of these things on their own is not strange and is not bad. It's when you kind of start to see a pattern. And honestly, we are giving you all the education that we can, but also I would just say that you have red flags within your own self that you can see, someone gave a gift to a kid because it was their birthday and they thought of them. That doesn't make you feel weird. But when you see kind of a pattern of things and you start to say, oh, this feels a little bit off. They feel like they are really focusing in on this kid in a way that is inappropriate. You kind of have an internal sense, I think, of these things. And so I just say to trust it. But some grooming behaviors that might, that we might notice are, gift giving, making a kid feel extra special. Kid magnet, as someone who's focused on only going to kid magnet activities, communicating in a peer-like way, repeated alone time with a child, getting touchy in a way that's really inappropriate, pushing physical boundaries, breaking the rules, and then justifying breaking the rules, and playful but inappropriate touch. So our policy that you all helped create, they address these pretty clearly about ways in which we can respond appropriately and care appropriately for our kids. Adequate supervision. Don't be alone with a kid that is not your kid ever at our church, or in parish groups. Just don't. If a kid wants to show you something in the early childhood room during a church meal and no one else is out there, you can say no. You can ask someone else to come with you. But it's just not a good idea. Just always have another adult present if it is not your child. And be in a well-seen area, a place where people are passing through, where it is not private, it is not away from people. That is just a kind of a very good rule of thumb to follow. And then again, a culture of communication. Always report to us if you see rule breaking or witness something that makes you feel uncomfortable. So these are some commitments that we ask all the adults of our church to abide by, but especially those of you who have gone through this training. Never be alone with a child or children, 2 adults always. The way that looks in our early childhood room in our nursery, because we thought about this when we were renovating the building. We thought about ways to make our rooms as safe as possible. So you'll notice that there are a ton of windows in those rooms. So because there are windows between the nursery and the early childhood room, we can kind of consider that one space. And so we will always have 3 people in that space at all times, right? So it could be 2 people in the early childhood and 1 in the nursery. It could be 2 in the nursery, 1 in the early childhood room, but we will always have multiple eyes in that space. And we encourage you as board members to feel free to go walk around during service, check in on people. Make sure that they're doing okay, but also just having extra eyes down there is always a good thing. It's also why we would eventually love to have some cameras in there, just as an extra step, an extra layer of protection for everybody. Never allow children to be alone in an area that cannot be easily supervised. The place that we see this most often happen is, like I said earlier, on like after church activities, church lunches and things, parents will allow their kids to go back into the early childhood or nursery to play while they're eating. And we're not gonna let that happen. If one of us remembers, we try to lock that office door, so that can't happen. But if you see kids going back there and there are not adults with them, just you can boot them out. You just tell them that is against our policies. The phrase I tell kids is that it's just not safe. It's not our safety policy, or it's against our safety policy. So please follow the rules that are outlined in our Safe Kids manual. I'm asking you to commit to follow those. There are we can't, tell you this physical touch is definitely okay and this is not. Sometimes there's going to be toddlers who are struggling, they're having a hard time. And so it's important that we might pick them up. They might sit in our lap during a story time. And that's just an important part of comforting a kid, right? But a good rule of thumb is that physical touch should never be for the benefit of an adult. So we're not going to give them a hug because we're sad. That is inappropriate. And then, communicate with me. Communicate with me, Pastor Chris, Pastor Banning, Pastor Andrea. Just, it does not have to be me, but just make sure that you are communicating with one of us. If you see something that is raises a red flag. That is for our volunteers. Okay, I believe that is all. Oh, hold on, sorry. I'm just going to go through the rest. These are how to check kids in and how to decline on Planning Center. And so I believe that is all that I have for you. If you have questions over any of this information, questions, concerns, comments, you are welcome to reach out to me. I think you all have my email, my phone number, and I'm happy to hear from you. I will include the link to the quiz. It's not really a quiz, it's like sort of a survey. You're going to be fine. It's not hard. I will include the link to that in this email so that you can fill that out after watching this. So thank you all so much for your care and your leadership, especially in terms of our kids. Okay.